Okay, so finally, Zed, you have had thoughts on the Peanut the Squirrel saga, and you wrote an article where you were making an argument that there is a new bipartisan convergence around animal rights. I'll admit that I've totally ignored the Peanut the Squirrel saga. I don't even really know what it's about. I mean, there's just limited bandwidth in my, I guess, brain to even follow up on every little social media nugget that comes up. So, explain to me why I should care if I about Peanut the squirrel, and then I guess relate it to what larger issue you think is relevant.
Yeah, so actually, I was writing a piece about this issue relating to a kind of a nonpartisan, or maybe even bipartisan, but officially nonpartisan organization that works on stopping government-backed animal testing, particularly like experiments that cause a lot of pain to animals. And so I was going to write a story about that, and then this Peanut the Squirrel story broke at the same time, so I used it as kind of the lead to the story, right? This is at my Substack, The American Saga, so it's theamericansaga.com. And so basically, start with the Peanut the Squirrel story. Basically, there was a social media influencer in New York State who had a squirrel and a raccoon as pets, right? And I believe the squirrel was actually an orphan, so he basically was raised by this guy. And they were fairly well domesticated, but as he became more famous, and people started to complain, it turns out it's actually illegal to hold wild animals captive in the state of New York. You can't have them as pets. So they were confiscated by the authorities in New York. And then to test them for rabies, they had to euthanize them. That's how the process works. So they were killed, and this caused a lot of uproar on social media. Squirrel in particular was very popular. And I noticed a lot of the people who were part of the uproar were conservatives. Like they were big fans of the squirrel, and they thought it was like a tyrannical government thing for them to do that. And so I use this as kind of the hook for the story about this group called White Coat Waste. And I think what's really interesting about White Coat Waste is like when we think of animal rights, we usually think of left-wing groups, right? Like twice as many like left-leaning people are vegetarians as right-leaning people, and the heads of organizations like PETA or the Humane Society tend to be left-leaning people. But White Coat Waste is actually made up of a mix of people, and some of them actually come out of the conservative universe. They work for conservative nonprofits or think tanks or media outlets, and their entire goal is just to reduce and to eliminate government spending on like painful animal experimentation. So a lot of people probably heard about the stories of like beagles being tortured as part of really excruciating experiments under Anthony Fauci by the NIH. A lot of those stories were actually like found and pushed forward by White Coat Waste, right? And so they've had a lot of success in getting members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to endorse their work. They've gotten entire like agencies in the government to stop painful experiments on cats and dogs. And actually, they're working with a Republican who just introduced a bill to defund a lot of this happening at the college level when it comes to these painful experiments on cats and dogs. So I think that, I guess the wider story here is that, concern for animal welfare shouldn't really just be coded as a liberal progressive thing, right? Like a lot of conservatives have a lot of the same concerns. And, I do think on some issues when it comes to like what you eat, it's true, it's still more of a partisan issue. But when you poll people about things, even going up through factory farms, a lot of people across the partisan spectrum are uncomfortable with them, right? Like they don't like how the animals are treated there. I think they have a different image in their mind of how animals should be treated. And you have to remember this when it comes to things like dog or cat ownership. There's no partisan divide, right? Families everywhere own these animals. They get to know these animals and relate to them, and I think come to see their needs and the requirement for them to have some standard of welfare rights. Yeah, so I think I wanted to write this story just kind of as kind of a good news story. I think that we're seeing a lot of partisan divergence, people fighting right now because these campaigns are really trying to get votes, but there are issues that people can agree on, and I think it's a really heartening one that folks are coming together on this one to try to help animals.
Okay, well, I think nevertheless I'm going to choose to opt out of the Peanut the Squirrel issue just to preserve my own sanity and to, I don't know, stay grounded in something like, I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just not going to focus on the squirrel issue, and I admit that's somewhat arbitrary. Okay, so closing out, Zed, are you in the prediction business? What's a key thing you're looking for tomorrow? Just put your pundit hat on for a second. Pretend that you're Steve Kornacki at the big election board.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really been one of those guys. I don't conduct polls or watch them super closely. I do think that I do know the politics of my state fairly well, Georgia, and I think that I'll say this much. One thing the Republicans did that was really unhelpful in 2020 was that they cast like a pall of doubt about early voting and mail voting. And so those numbers went way down for Republicans. And so some people say, well, why does that matter? It's just like they can vote early, they can vote on election day. It's going to be the same number of votes. Well, not exactly, right? Because when you're voting early, one, you're guaranteeing those people voted. They're not going to forget to vote or just opt out of voting. Second, they're getting data, right? They're getting data about who's voting and when they're voting, how they're voting, so they can narrow their universe and get out the vote on the remaining voters, right? So I do think it's helping the Republicans, at least in my state, that their early voting seems to be back to robust means before in like the pre-2020 days, the days when Republicans were not scared or suspicious about it. And I do think that that gives them a little bit of an edge where I live. I think something like that is happening in other places with good early voting numbers for Republicans, but I haven't followed it as closely. And honestly, to really understand the trends, you have to be really like a real nerd about like Pennsylvania or Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona. And I'm just not, so like I don't really know. But yeah, I guess that's the best of my knowledge. I don't want to go any further than that, just because it is actually really complicated. I think anyone who tells you anywhere, oh, I'm super confident one person's going to win, they probably don't know. So it's too close of an election for that.
Well, I will certainly confess that I also don't know who's going to win, nor do I think that I have to engage in any predictive mumbo jumbo. So, and then if I'm wrong, I pay no reputational price, strangely. So I just don't make any hard and fast predictions. What I try to do is analyze the world around me, and then if that has any predictive value, people can extrapolate from it. Like, for example, as I mentioned in the intro, I do think that I've encountered a notable number of low propensity voters in Pennsylvania who, if they were contacted by a competent Republican get out the vote style operation, maybe they could be motivated to take the plunge and actually go and vote for Trump, because they attest to a preference for Trump compared to Harris, but they're simply not motivated enough or don't have enough faith in this quote unquote system writ large to even think that going to vote is worth their time. So that's the profile of a certain maybe breed of voter out there that I've tried to sketch out. So if the Republicans do lose, then I think that will be, yeah.
No, it is very true that undermining faith in the vote is like a toxic thing for Republicans. The key example of that was in 2021 when we had the Senate runoffs here, right? Both the Senate seats went to runoffs. And there was a drop-off in vote. Around 400,000 Republican voters just didn't vote between like the general election and then the runoff. And when they surveyed a lot of those people later, some of the conservative nonprofits did that. They said that a lot of them just think their vote didn't count, right? Because Trump went around telling them the vote didn't count. Trump went around telling them the voter fraud in Fulton County or whatever destroyed their vote. So like some people do internalize that. It's not just like political rhetoric. They like really think it's true. And so if I had to give any advice to the Republican Party, if they asked me, like, stop telling your voters that the elections are all rigged and their votes don't matter, because some of them really believe it and they just stop voting. So yeah, that is a factor for sure.
Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.